My family disowned me. Not because I failed them. Not because I wasn't good enough. But because I had the courage to be myself. They told me I was a disappointment. They told me I was bringing shame to the family name. They told me if I didn't change who I was no longer welcome. So I left. And I spent the next 10 years building my own empire. Today, I'm worth $1.8 billion. My family members work for me. And the best part? They finally understand what they lost when they rejected me. If you want to hear how I turned my family's rejection into the greatest motivation of my life, how I built something extraordinary, and how I found genuine love and acceptance, smash that like button and subscribe. Because this is a story about finding your power when the people who raised you couldn't see it. Let's begin. My name is Alex Sterling, and I grew up in one of the wealthiest families in America. The Sterlings. Old money. Real estate. Investments. Philanthropy. We were the kind of family that had buildings named after us. Streets named after us. Foundations in our name. But we were also the kind of family that had very specific expectations. My father, Charles Sterling, is 72 years old. He built the family business into a multi-billion-dollar empire. He's a powerful man. Respected. Feared. Someone who gets what he wants. My mother, Patricia, is 70. She comes from old money herself. Her family made their fortune in banking. She's a woman of tradition. Propriety. Appearances matter above all else. My older brother, James, is 48. He's the golden child. Married to a woman from another prominent family. 2 children. Perfect life by every traditional measure. My younger sister, Sarah, is 42. She married a congressman. She has 3 children. She's exactly what my parents wanted, a woman who married well and produced heirs. And then there's me, Alexander Sterling, 40 years old. The family's biggest disappointment. I grew up knowing I was different. Not in a way I could name when I was young. Just different. While my brother was interested in dating girls and talking about business deals, I was more interested in my art. In poetry. In understanding people's emotions. My parents noticed this difference. They tried to correct it. When I was 12, my father took me to his office and told me about the importance of being a man. A real man. Someone strong. Someone powerful. Someone who didn't show weakness or emotion. I tried. God, I tried so hard to be what he wanted. But I couldn't change who I was fundamentally. By the time I was 18 and heading to college, I knew the truth. I was gay. I didn't tell my family. I was terrified. My father had made it clear throughout my childhood that homosexuality was a perversion. A sin. Something that would destroy the family name if it ever became public. So I stayed silent. I dated girls to keep up appearances. I went to the business school my father wanted me to attend. I tried to build a life that would make my family proud. But I was miserable. At 28 years old, I couldn't do it anymore. I was working in the family business, making money, going through the motions, but I was dying inside. I was living a lie, and I couldn't sustain it. I came out to my parents on a Sunday evening at their house. I was terrified. My hands were shaking. But I knew I had to do it. I had to stop living a lie. My mother actually took it relatively well at first. She cried, but she said she loved me regardless. My father's reaction was different. He was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was like I had become a stranger to him. Like I had become something less than human. "You are no longer my son," he said quietly. "As far as I'm concerned, you're dead. You will not work in this company. You will not use the Sterling name. You will not receive any inheritance. You will not be welcome in this house. You have 1 week to gather your belongings and leave." My mother tried to protest, but he silenced her with a look. "If you stay in contact with him, you will face the same consequences," he told her. I left that house with 2 suitcases and the clothes on my back. I was 28 years old, and my family had cast me out like I was nothing. The hardest part wasn't the rejection. It was the abandonment. My mother wanted to stay in contact, but my father threatened to cut her off financially if she did. My brother pretended I didn't exist. My sister sent me a text message saying she couldn't risk her husband's political career by being associated with me. I was alone. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. My family rejected me for being who I was. But that rejection was the catalyst for everything that followed. It was the moment I realized I had nothing to lose. It was the moment I decided to stop living for their approval and start living for myself. The first few months after being disowned were the hardest of my life. I moved to a small apartment in Brooklyn. I had very little money. I had no support system. I had no family to fall back on. But I also had something I'd never had before: freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to hide who I was. I could be myself. I started going to LGBTQ+ community centers. I made friends for the first time, real friends who accepted me for who I actually was. I met people who had similar stories to mine. People who had been rejected by their families. People who understood what it felt like to be cast out. And something extraordinary happened. I realized that my pain wasn't unique, but my response to it could be. While I was struggling financially, I started noticing patterns in the businesses I was seeing. I was working temp jobs, administrative work, data entry, nothing impressive. But I was observant. I saw inefficiencies. I saw opportunities. I met a man named David at a community center. He was a software engineer, and we became friends. We'd sit in coffee shops and talk about life, about our experiences, about our dreams. One day, I mentioned some ideas I'd been having about how to optimize supply chain management for small businesses. David looked at me and said, "Why don't we build that?" I laughed. I had no money. I had no resources. I had no credibility. But David was serious. We spent the next 6 months building a prototype in our spare time. David handled the technical side. I handled the business side. By the time we were done, we had created something genuinely innovative. We pitched it to a few small business owners we knew. They loved it. Within a year, we had our first paying customers. Within 3 years, we had built a company worth $50 million. I was 31 years old, and I was a successful entrepreneur. My family had no idea. I had changed my last name professionally. I was going by Alex Morgan instead of Alexander Sterling. I didn't want anything to do with the Sterling name. I didn't want to trade on my family's reputation. I wanted to build something that was entirely mine. By the time I was 35, my company had gone public. The IPO valued the company at $500 million. I owned 60% of it, which meant I was worth approximately $300 million. I was financially independent. I was successful. I was happy. Most importantly, I was living authentically. I had a partner, a wonderful man named Marcus, and we had built a life together. We had a home. We had friends. We had a community. I had everything I'd ever wanted. Everything except my family. That still hurt. No matter how successful I became, there was still that wound of rejection. That knowledge that my own parents had chosen to disown me rather than accept me. But I had learned something important. I didn't need their acceptance to be worthy of love. I had built a successful life away from my family. But success alone wasn't enough to heal the wound of rejection. That would come later, when my family realized what they had lost, and when I had to decide whether forgiveness was possible. The call came from my mother. It had been 12 years since I'd heard from her voice. 12 years since I'd been cast out. "Alex," she said tentatively when I answered. "It's Mom." I wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost hung up. Part of me wanted to. Part of me was still so angry at her for not standing up to my father, for not choosing me. But I didn't hang up. "Hi, Mom," I said quietly. "I saw you on the cover of Forbes," she said. Her voice was shaking. "I recognized you immediately. I showed your father." "How did that go?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He didn't respond well," she said. "But I've been thinking about it. About you. About what we did to you. And I need to apologize." I felt tears starting to form. "I'm sorry, Alex," she continued. "I'm so sorry. I should have stood up for you. I should have told your father that I didn't care what he thought. I should have chosen you. And I didn't. And I've regretted it every single day for the past 12 years. I didn't know what to say." "I want to see you," my mother said. "I want to know who you are now. I want to meet Marcus. I saw a photo of you two together in a magazine. He looks like a good man. I want to know my son again." I agreed to meet her. I was nervous. I was angry. But I was also hopeful. Maybe there was a chance to rebuild something with my mother. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. When she saw me, she cried. She hugged me, and I felt 12 years of pain and longing in that embrace. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, about how my father had become increasingly difficult over the years, about how she had regretted not standing up to him every single day. "Your father is not a well man," she told me. "Emotionally, I mean. He's always been so focused on power and control. And when you came out, he saw it as a loss of control, a failure on his part. He couldn't accept that he had a son who was different from what he expected." "That's not my problem," I said, and I meant it. "I know," my mother said. "I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just trying to explain. He's still my husband, and I love him. But I also love my son. And I should have made that clear 12 years ago." Over the next few months, my mother and I rebuilt our relationship. She came to my home. She met Marcus. She saw my life. And she was genuinely happy for me. She also started talking to my brother and sister. She told them that I was willing to forgive them, that I wanted them to know me as an adult. James reached out first. He was uncomfortable. He was clearly worried about what this would mean for his business relationships. But he tried. He came to dinner at my apartment with his wife. We talked. It was awkward, but it was a start. Sarah was harder. She was still worried about her husband's political career. But eventually, she also came around. And my father refused to acknowledge me. Even when my mother told him that I was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Even when my success became undeniable. He refused to admit that he had been wrong about me. My family was slowly trying to reconcile with me. But there was still the question of my father. A man who had rejected me completely, who still refused to acknowledge me. And there was also the question of what I would do with my power. Would I use it to help my family? Or would I use it to prove a point? 3 years after my mother reached out, my father's business started to fail. The Sterling Empire had been built on real estate and traditional investments. But the world was changing. Technology was disrupting markets. New competitors were emerging. And my father, now 78 years old, was refusing to adapt. The company was hemorrhaging money. Investors were pulling out. The future looked bleak. My brother James came to see me. He was panicked. "We're going to lose everything," he told me. "The company is collapsing. Dad won't listen to reason. He won't modernize. He won't accept that the market has changed. We need help. And you have the resources to help us." I looked at my brother. I thought about all those years of him pretending I didn't exist, of him choosing his comfortable life over his relationship with me. "Why should I help?" I asked. "Because we're family," James said. "Because Mom asked me to reach out. Because despite everything, you're our brother." "I'm your brother when it's convenient," I said coldly. "Where were you when Dad disowned me? Where were you when I was homeless? Where were you when I was struggling?" "I was a coward," James admitted. "I was afraid of what it would cost me. I was afraid of losing my inheritance, my place in the family, and I chose that over you. And I've regretted it. I know I have no right to ask for your help, but I'm asking anyway." I didn't answer him immediately, but over the next week, I thought about it. I thought about my mother's words, about how my father was a broken man who couldn't accept difference, about how my family was struggling, and they were reaching out to me. I could have refused. I could have let them fail. I could have used their failure as proof that I was better than them. But that's not who I wanted to be. I called a meeting with James, my mother, and my sister. "I will help you save the company," I told them. "But on one condition. I'm taking a controlling interest. 51%. That means I'm in charge. That means the company becomes what I want it to be, not what my father wanted it to be." "What about Dad?" my mother asked. "Your father will receive a generous retirement package," I said. "He will have no involvement in the company going forward. He will retain the title of founder, but nothing more. Those are my terms." My family agreed. My father, of course, refused to accept this arrangement. He saw it as the ultimate humiliation. His own son taking over his company. His legacy being transformed into something unrecognizable. But he had no choice. The board voted in my favor. I became the CEO of Sterling Enterprises at 38 years old. The first thing I did was completely restructure the company. I invested heavily in technology. I hired young, innovative people. I created a company culture that valued diversity, inclusion, and authenticity. I made sure that LGBTQ+ employees were not just welcome, but celebrated. The company transformed. Within 5 years, it was worth more than it had ever been under my father's leadership. We were at $3 billion in valuation. My family watched as I took the company their grandfather had built and transformed it into something that reflected my values. My father watched too, though he refused to acknowledge what was happening. He lived in his mansion, bitter and alone, refusing to accept that his son had surpassed him. My mother was proud. My brother and sister were grateful. And I was at peace with myself. I had taken control of my family's empire. Not out of revenge, but out of a genuine desire to build something better. But there was still the question of my father. A man who continued to refuse me. A man who was dying bitter and alone. Was there any way to reach him? Or was some rejection just too deep to heal? My father had a stroke when he was 82 years old. It wasn't severe enough to kill him, but it was severe enough to change him. He was paralyzed on his right side. He lost the ability to speak clearly. He was trapped in a body that no longer worked the way he wanted it to. He was living my nightmare. Loss of control. My mother called me immediately. "Your father is in the hospital," she said. "The doctors think he'll survive, but he'll need long-term care. I know he wouldn't want to see you, but I'm asking you to come anyway." I went to the hospital. My father was lying in a hospital bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His face was slack on one side from the stroke. His eyes, when he saw me, filled with something that might have been anger or might have been regret. I couldn't tell. "Hi, Dad," I said quietly. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. He tried to speak, but the words came out garbled. He was frustrated. He was furious. He was trying to push me away with his functioning arm. I didn't leave. "I know you don't want me here," I said. "I know you've spent the last 14 years refusing to acknowledge me. I know you're angry. But I'm here anyway, because you're my father, and despite everything, I still love you." My father's eye glistened. Was that a tear? Was that emotion breaking through all those years of pride and rejection? I stayed with him in the hospital. I sat with him while he recovered. I didn't push him. I didn't try to force reconciliation. I just was present. Over the following weeks, my father slowly regained the ability to speak. It was difficult. The words came slowly. But he could communicate. One day he looked at me and said, with great effort, "I'm sorry." It took him a full minute to say those 3 words. But he said them. I held his hand and cried. "I know you are," I said. My father tried to speak again. "I was wrong," he managed. "About everything. About you. About what matters." "You were," I agreed. "But you're saying it now, and that matters." Over the next year, as my father recovered, we slowly rebuilt a relationship. He would never be the father I wished I'd had. He would never be perfect. But he was trying. He was genuinely trying to understand the son he had rejected. One day, I brought him to the Sterling Enterprises headquarters. I showed him what I had built. I showed him a company that was thriving. A company where LGBTQ+ employees were celebrated. A company that was making a positive impact in the world. My father looked around at the diverse workforce. At the young people of every gender identity and sexual orientation working side by side. At the company I had built on the foundation he had created. "You did this," he said slowly. "You made it better." "I made it mine," I said. "I made it reflect my values. And the company is better for it." My father nodded. And I think, for the first time, he truly understood. Not why I was gay. I don't think he ever fully understood that. But he understood that I was worthy. That my rejection of his values was not a rejection of his legacy, but a transformation of it into something greater. I had finally reached my father. But the real test was still to come. Could I truly forgive him? Could I move past the pain of those 14 years of rejection? Or would that wound never fully heal? 5 years after my father's stroke, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 87 years old. He had spent those 5 years slowly making peace with who I was. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I'd wished for as a kid. But it was something. At his funeral, I gave a eulogy. I talked about the man he was, ambitious, brilliant, driven. I talked about his flaws, his need for control, his inability to accept difference, his fear of anything that didn't fit into his narrow worldview. But I also talked about his journey, about how, at the end of his life, he had the courage to try to change, to try to understand his son, to acknowledge his mistakes. "My father was not a perfect man," I said to the assembled mourners. "But he was my father. And despite our differences, despite the years we lost to rejection and anger, I loved him. And I believe, in the end, he loved me too." I watched my mother cry. I watched James and Sarah cry. I watched Marcus squeeze my hand. After the funeral, I made a decision. I established the Charles Sterling Foundation for LGBTQ+ youth. In my father's name. The foundation would provide support to young people who had been rejected by their families because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We would provide housing assistance, educational support, mentorship, and most importantly, acceptance. My father's name would be associated with helping the very people he had once rejected. It felt like the most fitting legacy possible. Not erasing his mistakes, but transforming them into something positive. The foundation became one of my most meaningful projects. We helped thousands of young people. We gave them housing. We gave them education. We gave them the one thing my father had refused to give me, unconditional acceptance. Today, I'm 50 years old. I run Sterling Enterprises, a $5 billion company that is recognized as one of the most innovative and inclusive corporations in the world. My company has won countless awards for diversity and workplace culture. I'm married to Marcus. We have 2 adopted children. We have a beautiful life together. My mother is still alive. She's 95, and she's one of my greatest supporters. She tells everyone that her proudest accomplishment is not the charities she supported or the causes she's championed, but her son. The son she almost lost. The son who became extraordinary despite, and perhaps because of, his family's rejection. My brother James runs the day-to-day operations of Sterling Enterprises. We have a good relationship now. We're not best friends, but we're brothers. We're family. My sister Sarah's husband left politics, and she became a vocal LGBTQ+ advocate. She's helped change laws in several states to protect LGBTQ+ rights. She's used her privilege and platform to make a real difference. This is my story. From rejection to acceptance. From rejection to power. From rejection to love. My family disowned me for being who I was. And yes, that hurt. Yes, that left scars that I'll carry forever. But it also freed me. It forced me to build something that was entirely my own. It forced me to find community and love outside of my family. It forced me to become the person I was always meant to be. I could have spent my life bitter. I could have spent my wealth punishing my family. But instead, I chose something harder. I chose forgiveness. I chose understanding. I chose to use my power to help others who were going through what I went through. If you were rejected by your family, know this: your rejection does not define your worth. Your family's inability to accept you says nothing about who you are. It says everything about their limitations, their fears, their inability to grow. You deserve love. You deserve acceptance. You deserve to build a life that reflects your authentic self. If this story moved you, if it made you think about family and acceptance and forgiveness, leave a comment and tell me, how do you find strength in rejection? And don't forget to subscribe to Buried Secrets for more stories about finding your power, accepting yourself, and building meaningful lives despite adversity. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that love and acceptance are possible, even after rejection. I'm Alex Sterling. And this is how I transformed my family's rejection into my greatest power, not through revenge, but through building something better. Through building a legacy of acceptance where there was once only rejection.